So, welcome, friends. Today is September 16th. It is Mexican Independence Day, and it is also the anniversary of the UFW, United Farm Workers grape boycott. And feels like a fitting thing for us to acknowledge that both of those anniversaries and those moments in history, and to celebrate some of that today together, considering all that's happening in the United States right now. Friends, we have a pretty amazing, yeah, please let us know. Sorry, I'm not following the slides, but please let us know in the chat if you have ever participated in a boycott campaign in your lifetime, if you come from families that honor some of those traditions. If so, what were you boycotting and why? Let us know. We love to hear from your experiences in the chat. If you're currently participating in a boycott of products, supported or coming out of, Zionist entities, Israel, please let us know too. Seems relevant right now. Yeah, so welcome. We're very happy that you're here. Tonight, we will continue to talk about militarism in our communities. And we are actually being joined by some of my colleagues who I love and respect very much, who work in different corners and parts of our organization, who will be talking to us about sort of coming at this issue from different aspects. We'll have my colleague King in New York, who does healing justice work, sharing with us about the history of the deployment of the National Guard. We're going to have Imani, who is our sort of policy person, one of our policy folks in DC, who will be talking to us a little bit about how things are going over there. That's where Imani lives in DC, and sort of what's been successful there to resist the occupation. And then we have Mary Zirkle, who will be sharing a little bit of a Chicago update, because I know folks are probably interested, paying attention, and aware of what might be happening or is already happening right now in Chicago. And before we get in, we'll also hear from Brett, who is our other policy colleague, who will give us a little update on the budget, the federal budget. And then we also have, we'll actually start off today with Saida, our colleague in New Mexico, who will lead us off with a little a skill share about ways to regulate ourselves and our nervous systems times when it feels tricky to do that, when our attention and our hearts and minds are being taken in so many different directions. So again, welcome. We're so happy that you're here. We're so happy to be with you. It's kind of amazing to see all of the ways that folks have participated and are currently participating in different kinds of boycotts. This is a way we can express our power, right? And show, or try to exercise a little bit of power as consumers in this system. So, welcome, friends. Keep sharing in the chat, and I will pass it off to my colleague, Saida.
Great. Thank you, Edith. I'm Saida. I'm in Albuquerque, which is the Tiwa territory, the Tiwa people, and I'm the co-director of the New Mexico program. And I really appreciated that opening song and video and the commemoration of this beautiful movement of the farm worker movement that my parents were part of. So I was 10 when I first had a grape, and I see a lot of people in the chat talking about being part of that great boycott. So you remember that too. When I was a little kid and my parents were taking Cesar around the churches to talk about why we should boycott grapes. So today I want to share a skill that I've learned about how to help regulate our nervous system, because I know it's a time when we're feeling a lot of stress and anxiety and anger and fear about what's happening in our country. It's been that way for a long time for many people, and for some people more recently feeling overwhelmed by all of it. And so I love sharing these techniques that I learned the last couple of years. And there's sort of an analogy I want to share about, like, personally how I learned it and how I see it relevant to being part of this movement to protect, resist, and build. And in 2022, my daughter was diagnosed with cancer. And I had all the feelings of grief, of definitely fear and anxiety and anger and depression and stress. And I remember talking with my sister, and I was almost hysterical. And she said, "You need to pull yourself together for your daughter." She wasn't discounting the feelings I had, but just that if I was going to be able to help my daughter, I had to figure out how to take care of myself. And she's immune compromised, and so I can't get sick. Like, that's really important to me that I don't get sick, because if I get sick, I can't be around her, and she needs me to be there for her. But I also need to be able to manage my fears and my anxieties, because if I'm bringing that to her while she's going through cancer treatment, it's very hard on her. Then she might feel like she has to take care of me, or it might make her feel more panicked if she's seeing me panicked. So I can have those feelings, but I had to figure out, like, how do I regulate all these terrible feelings I'm having going through this, seeing my daughter suffer cancer. And so that's how I learned these techniques. And I've thought about, like, oh, this is actually useful for activists. This is useful to people in movements working for peace and justice, because we want to bring our best self, right? And we can't really help each other. Like, I couldn't help my daughter if I was in a state of hysteria or panic or fear. Like, that wasn't helpful to her. Again, I can feel those feelings, but I had to manage those feelings. And in the same way, I think that it's useful for us to learn how to help ourselves manage our stress, our anger, our anxiety, our fears, so that we can show up and be our best selves for each other. So I've shared different techniques over the course of the year. So if you've come to Protect Resist Build, you've seen other staff share things. Today I'm going to share bilateral tapping, which maybe you've heard of. It's very simple. You can do it with me. But the idea of bilateral tapping, it helps to bring in both sides of your brain, and it helps to regulate your nervous system and bring in your parasympathetic nervous system. So this is something my daughter and I do before she gets ready for a chemo treatment, when we're waiting for test results and we're really worried what they're going to be, is to help bring ourselves back into a place where we're not in such a high level of anxiety. So I'm going to demonstrate it. If you want to try it, you can hook your thumbs. I'm going to teach you one called the butterfly hug. And you put them on your chest. I hope you can see this. And you're just going to tap both sides of your chest, alternating. And you can see how this makes you feel. This is called butterfly hug. And what we're doing with, like, a gentle but firm tapping on our chest is we're stimulating both sides of our brain, which brings down the parasympathetic system. It brings down our stress, it can help our heart rate. So you could use this in moments where you are getting upset. Maybe you're hearing really bad news. You're watching TV or social media. Another way you could do it, if you want it to not be so obvious that you're doing bilateral tapping, is you could put your right hand on your left knee and your left hand on your right knee. And I could picture maybe you're at a city council meeting and it's really upsetting, or people are getting mad. And you could tap your right knee and your left knee. Or maybe you're sitting at a table at a meeting that's really upsetting and you don't want it to be obvious, like doing this. You can just do your knees, right? And this helps you when you're in those moments in meetings and events where there are things upsetting happening. Again, you can feel those things, but how do you regulate yourself to get yourself into a place where you can be your best self and you can regulate those emotions so that you can contribute to all the ways that we need each other in this moment to protect and resist and build. So I hope you'll try that the next time you're in a place where you're getting really upset or anxious, and see how it affects your body. So thank you for trying that with me. And I'm going to turn it over to my wonderful colleague, King, in New York City. Excited to hear what you're going to share today about what's been going on over there.
Thank you for that. That was something. It made me feel so good. I tossed my notes away. Now I've got to go find them. No, that was really really good. Thank you, everybody. It's so good to see people from so many places all coming together and hearing the stories about boycotts. And I had heard, maybe you can verify this, that the boycott was.
King, you muted yourself.
Oh, so I heard that the boycott was actually named after some governor during the Irish famine who was taxing people so badly that it was taking a large share of their crops, and so everyone decided they weren't going to turn their crops over anymore. Guess what his name was? Boycott. So if anyone who wants to put in the chat whether that's true or not, if anyone knows Irish history, please let me know. So I want to acknowledge that I'm on Lenape land here in New York City, and I'm going to talk about some of the history of the National Guard. And this journey just sent me into an area of things that I thought I knew about, knew nothing at all about. So let's just go for it. Um, the first, oh, and I like to start things off with a quote. And so my quote is from somebody named Stokely Carmichael. And if anybody wants to put in the chat who that was, that would be great. And the quote that I'm using is, let's see, what's the best way to say this? Let me just think on it for a second. If the people don't organize themselves, conditions will. And we are organizing ourselves, but conditions are also organizing us as we speak. So that's my thought for the day. So the National Guard. I started right off already needing, I wish I had had this when I first started this research, because the first thing I found had me ready to tap my butterflies and my knees and everything else that I could tap too. So the National Guard was founded in 1636, and it has been listed as the oldest organized militia in North America, according to the National Guard. Now that sort of got to me because as a Cherokee, I was disappointed to find out that my Wampanoag and Narragansett and Nauset and Pequot and others didn't have militias. I wonder how we protected ourselves against these newcomers. But that's the National Guard history for you. In 1952, the Armed Forces Reserve Act of 1952 established a military reserve force, including the National Guard, the Air National Guard, the Army, Navy, Marine Corps, and Air Force and Coast Guard reserves, and at the federal and state levels. So National Guard is part of a ready reserve that can be activated by the president in national emergencies with or without the authority of state governors, as we're finding out. The president can also deploy the military or federalize the National Guard in states that either defy federal law or cannot control insurrections under the Insurrection Act of 1807. And the Insurrection Act authorizes the president to deploy military forces inside the United States to suppress rebellion or domestic violence or enforce the law in certain situations. The statute implements Congress's authority under the Constitution to, quote, provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions, end quote. This is the primary exception to the Posse Comitatus Act, under which federal military forces are generally barred from participating in civilian law enforcement activities. And as you may remember, that in 2020, Trump considered invoking the Insurrection Act during the protests over the George Floyd killings. So now I'm just going to go through a list of some of the more noteworthy National Guard actions going through history. And one of the primary areas was during the Civil War. And this is a piece of New York history. In 1863, there were draft riots in New York City. Rich people could pay the equivalent of $7,000 today to not have to serve in the draft during the Civil War. And the pushback against the draft not only caused a reaction against the state and federal government, but it also caused the largest riot in history, and it was directed at Black people. And scores of New Yorkers freed and enslaved were just slaughtered, children and the like. And the National Guard ended up being called in for that. There was some National Guard activity against the Ku Klux Klan. And here's a little bit of what I call a militia National Guard flip. And I'm going to give Arkansas as an example. Right after the Civil War, the Arkansas militia was deployed by the state in order to repress the newly freed Black people. Then, following Reconstruction, the election of the radical Republicans in conjunction with the freedmen, they took over the state government, took over the militia, and then started to use the militia against the former government and what later became the Ku Klux Klan. Then the use of the National Guard militia flipped again when the Democrats came back into power after Reconstruction, disbanded the Republican and progressive militias, and reimposed the other ones that acted in consort with the Klan to create Jim Crow and all of the repression that followed after that. The next notable time was the Great Railroad Strike in 1877, and there the governors in Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Ohio deployed the National Guard, and to break the strike, President Hayes deployed federal troops. And so we haven't really heard much about the use of the National Guard to break strikes, but I'm bringing all these up because there's no reason to think that none of this could happen again, that it might only be limited to protesters. The Great Railroad Strike in 1877, the Pullman Strike of 1894. There, the Guard was sent in at the direction of the president against the wishes of the governor of Chicago. Their presence agitated the population, and the rebellion got even worse, and many people were shot and killed by the National Guard. And let's fast forward to 1932. You may have heard about the Bonus Army in Washington, D.C. After World War I and the stock market crash. Veterans' situations got so bad that they actually had a march on Washington, and they set up a camp called the Bonus Army. And the advocates, they were advocating for pay, and President Hoover sent, because this was federal territory, so there was no one to push back against it, Federal Hoover ordered General Douglas MacArthur to send tanks and the 3rd Cavalry into the camps, which they attacked and burned to the ground. Then when we move into the Civil Rights era, we have some examples of more deployments of the National Guard by the president, but this time it's done against governors, but it's in order to reinforce civil rights laws and cases. So the National Guard was there for the desegregation of Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas in 57 and 58, the desegregation of University of Mississippi in 1962, the desegregation of the University of Alabama in 1963, the integration of the Alabama public schools in 1963. And now fast forward, we begin to see some deployments in the North. In 1964 in New York, Governor Nelson Rockefeller activated the Guard in response to riots in Rochester around police abuse. In 1965, the National Guard, against the wishes of the Alabama governor, were deployed for the second Selma to Montgomery March. You know, the first one ended in bloodshed. In 1965, from 1965 to 1971, the National Guard was deployed 260 times during urban rebellions, anti-war disturbances, and following the death of Martin Luther King Jr. In the 20 years prior to that, it had only been deployed 88 times. And so among some of the most notable during that time period was the Watts Rebellion in Los Angeles, California. And also in 1967, National Guard were deployed against some of these rebellions with as little as 6 hours of training. And they were deployed to challenge and put down the Black racial uprisings in Detroit and Newark. Rather than keep the peace, they used lethal force to great harm. And in the Detroit Rebellion, Governor Romney, the father of Mitch, called the National Guard. Then President Johnson called in the 82nd and 101st Airborne, so it was actually deployment of actual military. In Newark, the National Guard was behaving so badly that then Newark police director condemned the untrained guardsmen for creating, as he said, quote, hysteria. Then we have in 1968 the deployment around the country in the wake of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Many people may not realize that in May 4th, 1970, it was National Guardsmen who responded to the student anti-war protests at Kent State. When they ran out of tear gas, they opened fire, killing 4 students and injuring 9. National Guard was deployed again in 1970 in New York City for the postal strike, in 1980 in the southern part of the country for the Cuban refugee crisis, for Hurricane Hugo in 1989, and then we come back to their deployment for the purposes of putting down rebellions, and that's in 1992 for the Los Angeles rebellions after the Rodney King acquittal, after the acquittal of the officers who had beaten Rodney King. In 2001, the president federalized the National Guard for military action abroad, which was something that hadn't been seen before, sending reserve forces, including the National Guard, who were 45% of the personnel deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan. So there's another possibility as we hear the drumbeats of war. In 2020, National Guard was deployed for George Floyd protests. People may not realize that it was 90 cities, 24 states, 62,000 troops were deployed. And then fast forward to 2024, most recently here in New York, Governor Hochul ordered over 1,000 people, other types of law enforcement like state police, 750 National Guard members, state police and transit officers to patrol the stations. So there's been a long history of their deployment in protests and in use in the military. And the last things I'll say is, Trump has just signed an executive order to go to Memphis. He's hinted that he's headed to Philadelphia. No surprise, Larry Krasner has been a long-time litigator against police abuse in Philadelphia and then became the progressive DA. And he was just quoted today as saying, if the National Guard comes, we'll do what we always do. We're going to enforce the Constitution. So we'll see what he means by that. So thanks for the chance to give you some of this history. And if you have anything to add to it, I'm just going to turn this into a document, and I'd like to see whatever you have found for your area. And I'm going to hand off to my coworker, Imani from DC.
Thank you. Thank you for that history. My name's Imani Cruz. I am the policy coordinator for migration justice here with the American Foreign Service Committee, and I live and work in Washington, D.C. A lot of my work is focused on federal immigration policy, and that often intersects with a lot of work of my colleagues. And I have the pleasure of working with a lot of our programs across the country and around the world. So today I'm just going to give kind of an update on the landscape of things that are happening in DC in terms of military occupation, the National Guard. This is not exhaustive in any way, just I think a taste, and also hopefully can give some insight into what we may see in the future. As King had mentioned, this is definitely not the first nor the last time we've seen attempts like this. And so for one, I want to note that DC is a unique case in many ways. One, the fact that DC is not a state does make it very much more vulnerable than a lot of other places. And so you might hear a bit about the DC Home Rule Act of 1973. And basically this legislation passed by Congress and President Nixon is the reason that residents of DC have a local council, have a mayor, have local neighborhood commissioners. We do have delegates in Congress, but they are not allowed to vote. Basically, their only job is to try to get legislation passed for DC statehood. And so because DC is not a state, there was a lot of compromises within this bill. So there is a part of the law that allows the president to take over, to federalize the DC government, including the National Guard and the police force, for a set 30 days. And that 30 days expired on September 10th. And so it is to note that if there was to be an extension, that's where we get in a lot of legal gray area, outside of what's written in DC Home Rule Act, outside of what we have seen historically. So yesterday, once again, President Trump has threatened to claim a national emergency in order to retake control of DC. And there's really not much legal precedent for if that is legal, if that is allowed, what that would look like. So there is definitely to be a lot of gray area in the treatment of Washington D.C. as a testing ground for this. As mentioned, there's a lot of other cities that are being threatened. We're hearing a lot are happening around Chicago. We have been already seeing a lot happening in LA. And the reason I really talk about DC Home Rule is oftentimes the solution that is brought up is statehood, is having representation for the over 700,000 people that live in the city of DC. But many of you all live in areas that are states. And this is still a threat. And so I think in this moment, it is really important to plug in and connect to your local advocacy groups and local advocacy movements to really push your local Congress people, your mayor, your governor, to really push that they have to defend their separation of state sovereignty from federal government. And I think they're not going to necessarily always do that out of a feeling of duty. Oftentimes they need to feel from the people that live in their area, from their constituents, that is something that we are going to call on them to do. I'd say that is something that DC has been working on as well. Even though we are not a state, we have our elected representatives, and they have often been very hesitant to push back, given the gray area that DC lives in. But we want to make sure that is definitely not a hindrance for future progress. And so definitely want to shout out to a huge success of a march that happened on September 6th. Over 10,000 people came out, and it was really, I'd say, a success because of the intersectional work of groups in DC. Free DC and ACLU of DC have already put in a lot of groundwork to try to push statehood for DC. And I think many people here are very much aware of this movement, have been for a while, but it has never been seen as an active threat, I think, by many. And so now that it is an active harm, many DC residents have been activated. And luckily that education groundwork has been done. And this intersected with CASA, which does a lot of large immigration based protests and movements in DC. Harriet's Dreams focus on a lot of issues that affect Black and Brown communities. Free Palestine movement, focusing on just ending occupation everywhere. All of this came together to really bring one of the biggest, the biggest marches we've had this year. But to really show people that occupation anywhere is not okay. And the intersectionality of it and how it affects and manifests in our community may look different and may affect us differently. But we will not stand by while occupation is currently happening, whether here in DC, whether in Palestine, whether in other communities. And so I think that was a really good takeaway. And you can go to the next slide. I think that was a really good takeaway from that movement, that people are ready to get out, to get moving, and to really have their voices heard. So I encourage you to take that message and work in your local communities to make sure that you are standing up for each other, protecting each other, and pushing your local representatives to do everything in their power to push back on this any kind of federal occupation. So with that, I'll pass it to my colleague, Mary.
Great.
Oh, I'm unmuted. Okay, cool. Thanks, Imani. Really inspiring to see everything that's been happening in DC and to hear your analysis of the home rule piece. Yeah, so I'm Mary Zirkle. I'm the Associate Regional Director for AFSC in the Midwest region. I also get to work with our awesome West region where Edith is from. But I've been living in Chicago for most of my life and been organizing in Chicago for over 30 years. And, I'm still in community with lots of folks. So this has been a really interesting period of time. I think, oh, you know what? I do have slides. Summer, if you want to pop those in. Thank you. Yeah, there's our Chicago demonstration. We have to have the pictures of our demonstrations. This was the week, the day before Labor Day, I guess the Sunday before Labor Day, and just a huge Chicago march. I think we've resisted so far. The National Guard has not been deployed in Chicago. For the moment, we kind of thought Pam Bondi was saying, no, we're not going to come to Chicago because the governor has not asked for it. But then just today, Trump was saying, oh, we're going to go to Chicago. But what has been happening, I think our resistance has mattered. The people have been in the streets and been very vocal. And also our mayor and our governor have both been very vocal that this presence, the National Guard presence and the increased ICE presence is not wanted. The mayor's done a couple of interesting things. Mayor Johnson passed an executive order reiterating, because we already are a sanctuary city and sanctuary state, but reiterating that the Chicago police are not allowed to assist ICE at all. And then just yesterday or today, I think he passed another executive order that we haven't seen the text of yet, that protects protesters from National Guard, like impeding them from, or all of us from impeding us from protesting peacefully or protesting at all, expressing our political views, our free speech. So those are some kind of interesting things, and I think that has had an effect. I think the other thing is that we have been building an infrastructure in Chicago, and I bet there's some people from Chicago on this call, so I really hope you'll pop your thoughts about this in the chat. But I mean, Chicago's an organizing town. We have a big movement infrastructure, very intersectional. Of course, not everybody loves each other, but everybody's been getting together on this. I was at a meeting last week, I think, where it was kind of said we already had 29 rapid response networks in the city, but people are building up new ones, I think, in this moment. People are communicating with each other. People are training. There's tons of trainings going on. And I think even before this recent influx, Tom Homan was complaining that people in Chicago knew their rights. It was too hard to deport people because we knew our rights and we were sharing that. However, bad things are still happening. We're definitely occupied federally by ICE and other federal agencies, and there are attacks being deployed from a military base. It's called Operation Midway, I think. If you go to the next slide, I also wanted to say, they have been kidnapping people, our neighbors, our community members, and even worse, I want to just bring in Silverio Villegas Gonzalez, who was killed by ICE during a traffic stop in the Chicago suburb of Franklin Park on September 11th. And he was just returning to his home after dropping off his children at daycare when he was killed. And ICE has not been transparent about what happened. They're making claims, but they're not releasing any kind of a report or body cam, etc. So I hope we can all hold him in our thoughts as we kind of move forward. I'd just take a minute to hold him in the light. So you can move to the next slide. So yeah, I wanted to bring in some concrete tools that we've been using in Chicago. Somebody who I am very lucky to be in community with here in Rogers Park in Chicago. Kelly Hayes is a Chicago organizer. You may know her as the host of the Truth Out podcast, Movement Memos, and she's also co-authored a book with Miriam Kaba called Let This Radicalize You. But she is somebody who we work with a lot, and I just wanted to quote her because even though at the moment we've repelled or not have somewhat repelled the National Guard. Kelly was just posting like, this is not the end of a struggle. This is a moment that should remind us of our power and embolden us to do more. We need to continue to strengthen our rapid response networks. We need to continue to map networks of defense and support for immigrants and for others who are targeted by this administration. We need to oppose the deployment of troops anywhere, including cities and states where Republican governors will support Trump in creating his fascist military spectacles. We need to continue to power up because there's a long fight ahead. And so with that in mind, Kelly and some other folks put together this concrete tool that I've been using in my community. And I just thought I'd share it with you. I'm going to share the link so that you can really take a deep look at it and hopefully use it in your community. I just popped it in there right now and I'll do it again. But if you go to the next thing, I'll show you, this is just a tool where we can get together with people in our communities and go through some questions and really start to map out what would a community defense formation look like. And it's going to be different in different places. So I did this recently with, we have an art and mutual aid hub in my neighborhood that I helped to found about 6 years ago, pre-pandemic, but boy, it sure came in handy during the pandemic. But we just recently did this and we're starting to expand our circle beyond the folks who are already part of our little mutual aid ecosystem. But the first step is to kind of just say, who's already in your neighborhood? You know, who are the groups, the hubs, the resources? And it's not just nonprofits, it could be churches, mosques. One of the things we were like, oh, the barbershop, Fuzzy's barbershop right next door. Like that's somebody who we really get along with. He's always helping us out. Like he's in the circle, you know, it could be lots of different things. And you kind of know what each group or hub does, who they serve, how they operate. And all of these questions, are they going to involve the police? We don't want to get the police involved in situations. So we're kind of looking for people who aren't going to do that. Do they have services, et cetera? And then we can go to step 2. I'm just going to kind of gloss over this because it could take too long. Yeah, then you think about like, okay, what relationships? We named all these people. Some of them we know, some of them we don't know. But what kind of relationships already exist? And then we drew a straight line or a solid line. If it was somebody that we already trusted, like Fuzzy the barber, or is it somebody that there's a loose or potential relationship? So we kind of know this other rapid response network in the neighborhood, but we haven't done that much stuff with them. So let's try to build that further. And then there's like an arrow, so like a one-way flow of resources or referrals. So for instance, there is a mental health resource in the neighborhood that we don't do that much stuff, but we know that they don't call the police. So when we are helping neighbors in mental health crisis, we feel good referring them to that space. One of the most important questions I think of this whole exercise has been, as you say, I've highlighted them in yellow down at the bottom, saying what kind of conflicts or one-sided beefs can be put aside right now? And what kind of minor or old fractures can be healed with a conversation? So we really don't have time to be fighting with each other right now. We need to be moving together, even if we don't agree on every little thing. So I think that's an important piece. And you can move to the next one. Then after looking at that, just kind of talking about what's our values. If we want to have a community defense network, what are our values? What kind of things? And so that could be anything. You're going to have your own grouping, and so you might have different things. But some of the things we talked about again was we don't want to involve police or ICE as we're defending our community. We want to make sure that ensuring trans and disabled people's safety is important, and keeping everybody out of carceral spaces, et cetera. So kind of having this is also a really great moment to like build your community deeper with whoever you're gathering for this conversation. If it's your faith community, if it's your apartment building, if it's your could even be like a weekly knitting club or something like that, right? You're just pulling people together in your community. And we can go to step 4. And what spaces do we need to protect? So where is there extra needed protection? So vulnerable blocks, places like we've seen in LA, like they're just going after day laborers, right? So where are those spaces where we know in my community, there's a park where there's an unhoused encampment. And so we already do food distribution. My mutual aid space already does food distribution there once a week. And so one of the things we identified is we're going to have more people. Like, I don't usually go to that, but I'm going to start showing up on Wednesdays now with a bunch of other people just to have more people in that space. Yeah, could we adopt a block or something like that? And yeah, we can go to the next thing, step 5. And where are the gaps? So, you know, who's missing? Which vulnerable folks in our area that we don't have relationships with or we're not already engaged with? Is there some way to connect with them? This is a really important one. And Syra, you've brought this up in your neighborhood too, like connecting with people who've lived through repression or authoritarian regimes. Like, what kind of wisdom do they have to bring to the table, and how can we learn from them? And then where are we already stretched and burned out? This is something we identified in my collective where like we're already kind of like on thin, everybody's feeling pretty spread thin, but that's why inviting more people in can give us some more capacity, which we are starting to do. And what kind of support are least available? So how can we beef that up? And can go to step 6. And then what's the next moves? You know, what is our strategy? Do we want to do a rapid response? Information sharing? Do we want to like reach out to some of the National Guard or other troops that are, you know, possibly their morale might be low and that might be a good organizing thing. So there's just lots of different things. You want to create a care hub. And again, you can go through this, but I just wanted to always share some concrete tools for you all. I hope you'll consider taking a look at this. Definitely follow Kelly's work in Truth Out and with the Movement Memos podcast. She's talking a lot about this authoritarian moment and how we can learn from other folks. Oh, yes. And the Fascism Barometer is also an excellent podcast. And Edith has popped. Those are like my top 2 right now. So check both those podcasts out. And that's all. That's what I got. Thank you so much for taking a look at these resources. And let's see, where are we going next? Edith, help me out. I can't remember.
Friend, I think what we're doing now is getting just
Brett.
hearing some. Oh, is it Brett or is it
Oh,
questions?
no, questions. You're right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, friends. So we've heard a lot, and it is really hard to hear the news about Silverio. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm always tearful on these calls, but that is it's upsetting. So just thanks for sharing that, Mary, and the update from Chicago. And friends, I'm curious, yeah, do we have any questions? We just got a lot of really powerful information. King, thank you for grounding us in that history. Imani, thank you for the report out from DC, and Mary for these powerful tools that Chicago organizers have created and are sharing out with the rest of us. Yeah, we can just take a minute and pause. If folks have questions, please do drop them in the chat, or yeah, raise your hand like Bart, and we can see somewhere if it's possible to unmute Bart and let them ask the question.
Okay, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, this is for Mary. I just had a question. I know that I understand the reasoning behind the no ICE, no police component, but when you're talking about public safety and stuff, you know, who are paying our tax money, you know, to help us out with that, and that's the police. And you know, in my past work, there have been occasions where, as much as I didn't want to involve the police situation, you know, somebody with a gun, etc., where I had to get them involved. And I understand. So I just want to be clear that is, you know, that is, if it's not, if the police are not used, there has to be a focus on those public safety aspects.
Yeah.
That would normally fall to the police. Thanks.
Yeah, no, that's been the project of the last decade, I think, in a lot of places. And no, you're 100% right. Like, what do we replace it with? And so a lot of people all across the country have been experimenting with a lot of different things. And I'll just speak to my community. We and everybody, if you do this exercise, you're gonna make your own rules. So that's not you know, you all can struggle through what makes the most sense for you. But for us, you know, as I said, we have a non-police mental health resource in our community. We have all actually in our mutual aid hub, we've trained a ton of people in the community to also be able to respond to a mental health crisis. We've done a ton of training on Narcan, administering Narcan, de-escalation of a lot of different things. We have a community, a signal thread. Everybody that's been, because I've done a ton of this training just through as in my job at AFSC in this community. And so we've got a big signal thread of a bunch of people that have been trained for our free store to work at our free store. They have to go through the non-police response training. And so we're all on this thread and we can respond to each other, and we've de-escalated things. We've administered Narcan. So not everybody's got that kind of thing, but there are other resources. What is the King? What is the name of that thing? Don'tcallthepolice.org, I think, is a place to start to see if there are non-police response alternatives in your community. And honestly, I think a lot of this is our Think Twice campaign. Like, we've done this training a lot, and we can share that resource too. But the number one thing about the reason that people call the police is often just that it's inconvenient. But you're right. There's like, okay, if there's a gunshot, if somebody's having a heart attack, you have to call 911. There's times when you're just going to have to do it, for sure, to your point.
Yeah, I'll just say that there's a group called REP Community Partners in South Minneapolis, or in North Minneapolis, that's also trying to figure some of this out for their community. And Zoe has been kind enough, thank you, Zoe, friend, to drop in the link to afsc.org Think Twice. And if there's anyone else that wants to sort of jump in or respond to these questions, but we've got a couple of questions. There's one from Moji asking, do you have a mediation conflict resolution component in your intersectional movement building? And Moji, is that to everyone here? Is that to AFSC? Please let us know if you want to ask your question out loud. You're welcome to do that. Okay, I'm going to keep us moving. Oh, please, Moji, go ahead.
Hi, yes, thank you so much. Thank you for what you're doing. It is critical at this point in the evolution of this young so-called civilization. I come from the other side of the pond in the global south. I'm from Iran, and a peace and justice and human rights and democracy and intersectional activist. And part of what I'm doing is in terms of movement building, we need a movement of movements. And so we have chambers of compassion that I'm organizing, endorsed by Noam Chomsky and others. I'll send some information in the chat. My question is, a lot of times as you are building collaborative connections intersectionally from cause to cause, especially, so that the work of a climate change activist and a peace activist and a human rights activist work together in the same way that corporations have chambers of commerce. We need chambers of compassion. And what I found over the decades of my activism is that conflict resolution or mediation is desperately needed. At Occupy in Tucson, I created a conflict resolution tent in one of the tents at Armory Park in Tucson, Arizona. So my question is a general question to all of you in terms of, to what extent do you have preventive as well as interventional mediation and conflict resolution as you're building difficult connections across various civil society causes? Thank you.
Great question, Moji. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm wondering if anyone at AFSC wants to answer programs, or anyone else on the call. I will just say that I know that is a thing that has come up more and more in our work over the years. Sometimes it gets to be, I think, a situation, and this is learning that I'm doing from folks like Miriam Kaba and Kelly Hayes and others who've been doing this work for so long. but that it often we ask others, we have conflicts in our groups, we ask outsiders to come in to help us deal with it. And I think, Moji, as you're saying, like building these chambers of compassion, and also circles of all, like these are things, these are skills we need, all of us need, right? To be building on a regular basis to deal with conflict, to be comfortable with it, and to know that this is like, usually conflicts are temporary, need some sorting out and move forward. When it comes to violence and other things, I think we are we do need some folks outside of ourselves sometimes. That's my personal opinion, but yeah, if anyone else wants to jump in, Mary, if you want to
I would just
add anything.
100%, this is it will bite you if you don't if you don't do some prep work, for sure.
That's right.
That's a great
Yeah.
point, Moji.
And
Yeah, and Moji,
anticipate the conflict.
I can share in the New Mexico program, Moji, that we used to run a year-long farmer training program. And at the beginning, we talked about the fact we're going to be together a year, and there are going to be times where we don't like each other. We're going to be in conflict with each other. We're going to disagree. We're going to, by saying it ahead of time, and this is how we're going to handle that when that happens, was a way of trying to model that conflict is normal, and there are healthy ways that we can handle that so that people knew what AFSC's expectations were. And then when we had times where we really came to a negative space of conflict, where there were community members that we were working with, where there was harm, we did, as Edith was saying, bring in skilled outside mediators, because sometimes maybe AFSC wasn't seen as outside or independent as like a mediator could in those situations. So yeah, we definitely, this is normal. This happens in our communities, is that we're going to be in conflict, but there are healthy ways to handle it, and of course, dysfunctional ways. So it's good to have people who are trained or helpful, or to lay out those expectations ahead of time.
Agreed. Appreciate the question, Moji, and also the resources that you're offering about your work. Yeah, I know that there's other questions in the chat, and I'm gonna ask some of our awesome people here in the room to help answer some of those, if that's possible. But Charlie, I see your question about Minneapolis, and I'll respond to you in a moment. But I'm going to move us along, and we'll come back at the end for more questions. We often move through our agenda pretty quickly here. So, hold on to that question, and if you have one that you want to share with the group, we'll come back to it. And for now, I'll go ahead and pass to our colleague, Brett, who's going to give us sort of federal policy update.
Hello, everyone. I hope that you all have been well, and I want to thank all of the speakers who come before me this evening. Did a really excellent job. This evening, I've also been thinking a lot about the National Guard and deployments to a lot of different cities. I should say that I work here also in Washington, D.C. with AFSC, where I cover a lot of economic and environmental policy. And in some previous calls, I've been on here discussing how a recent bill passed through Congress, the so-called One Big Beautiful Bill Act, that was signed into law in July, has come with a lot of tax cuts for the rich and simultaneously cuts to our healthcare programs. But it was a very large bill, and it was not limited to these things. So I've been thinking a lot more about the occupation of American cities from a budgetary perspective, which sounds like a very strange thing, but I'll ask that you follow me through this. For one thing, the bill that I've been talking about, the healthcare and the tax aspects of, also provided an unprecedented amount of money to domestic security, usually in the form of ICE or Border Patrol. So I gave a few numbers here. There's funding to hire 10,000 new ICE officers, 3,000 new Border Patrol agents, and capacity for another 100,000 people in detention at any given point in time, along with $17 billion to help local law enforcement when they're helping with border or immigration policing, because most border policing is internal, it's not at the border. Overall, the OBA, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, is going to increase ICE's budget 10 times over its current levels by 2029, and it will become the largest federal law enforcement agency in the United States, larger than the FBI. This is an explosion that has provided the White House, the Office of the Presidency, with a lot more flexibility in how it wants to deploy this group, because ICE frequently functions, in frank terms, as a paramilitary organization for the White House. Next slide, please. So I've been looking around and thinking a lot about DC and I am going to present something that I guess I'll call a DC model, which is just based on my observations so far. And I've been trying to think what the model for occupations might look like for other cities like Memphis, Chicago, New Orleans, Philadelphia, based on what I've been seeing here. And as previous speakers have noted, DC is kind of a unique circumstance, but I think that there's kind of a recipe here which can be applied to other cities. The first is that the president has the authority to call in the National Guard to a city on pretty flimsy grounds, which is where the president's authority can come into kind of coordinating these assaults on cities. Pro-Trump state governments can also deploy their own state guards as well. And although these guard members cannot actually arrest anyone, they can detain suspects and then call either the police or other federal agents to come and to arrest them. Because of these limitations, though, the National Guard here in DC have mostly been used to patrol or to be stationary within areas that are very high traffic, transit areas, major traffic intersections, things like that. By keeping the National Guard there, it opens up a lot of resources for local police who would otherwise have to be watching a lot of these major traffic areas. So essentially, by having the National Guard step in for some of these police roles, it creates resources, frees up resources for local police departments to engage in far more aggressive policing tactics than they usually can, because now they have a larger amount of resources that aren't being drawn onto patrols of areas which are usually safe, but because of tourism or because of economic activity, require a lot of people just sort of standing around. ICE is sort of the final step in this recipe because similarly, they can be controlled by the president in a fashion somewhat similar to the National Guard. They can organize immigration raids on top of this combination of National Guard and police resources, along with other members of DHS, the Drug Enforcement Agency, and the FBI, all of whom have their own jurisdictions, immigration, drugs, etc. So while the National Guard is watching busy intersections and the police are pursuing their own leads, whatever you might call it, all of these agencies are simultaneously engaging in their own raids around the cities, which altogether comes to what we see in DC as a form of occupation. It is a coordinated, synchronized effort between state, local, and federal authorities. Next slide, please. But what's interesting about this is that it's not really planned for in the budget. Can we go forward 2 slides? There we go. Yes, there we go. So at the root of this, basically in order to free up resources for the local police department, the National Guard's manpower is key to being able to set up an occupation like they have in DC. And because it can be done in any state, it's not one of those authorities that's exclusive to DC. This could be recreated in Memphis or in Chicago. However, the National Guard has a finite budget. They did not stand before Congress last year and said, for when Trump comes into office and decides to start occupying cities, can we set some money aside for that? They have to have their operations funded by the federal government when they're operating under the president's orders, and it gets expensive very quickly. The estimates right now in DC are that National Guard deployments are costing $1 million per day on top of all of the other activities that the National Guard would be doing. And if they do multiple different occupations of different cities all at once, this could stack rapidly. None of this money that's being used for the DC occupation was budgeted ahead of time, is what I've been getting to. So where exactly is this money coming from? There's no pool that they're drawing from that they could take it from. We don't actually know the answer to that question because, like most parts of the DC occupation, they have been kind of purposefully non-transparent about the behind-the-scenes workings of all of it. But there was an interesting news story last week where a spokesperson for the Washington State Army National Guard said that they are now having to draw back on their annual training exercises. About $3 million they normally get for training is no longer there, and kind of speculated publicly that this is probably going to domestic deployments, which suggests for us that the DC model is only made possible by Trump's kind of illegal, kind of legal ability to take funds from where they're supposed to go and spend them on other things entirely. And this is a trend that we've kind of seen across a lot of Trump administration activities right now. But basically, by using existing budgets as slush funds, all of this policing, all of this domestic militarization becomes possible. Next slide. So this is not just kind of, although I do have fun with just kind of the academic theorizing here of where the money comes from, this has practical implications for us as well if we want to try to organize against these sorts of things. Based on what the DC model suggests about how they would try to occupy cities like DC or like Memphis, what would an ideal response in law be to make it impossible for them to do something like this? The first, obvious and straightforward, is cuts to ICE's budget. Every single cent that has been given to ICE under this new legislation is a waste of our money, and it's money being spent on cruelty against fellow man. Ideally, we would abolish ICE entirely, but I will also take an 80% budget cut. You know, we'll start conservatively and then work towards abolition if we can. More directly, and this kind of becomes a boring administrative matter when you start to talk with people about it, their eyes kind of glaze over. But legal restrictions on the president's ability to repurpose funds are going to become extremely important in the next couple of years. If the president is allowed to just take money out of any program and spend it on any other program, then it is a recipe for dictatorship because there are no longer any limits whatsoever on what money can go anywhere. There's just one big pot of money and then where Trump wants it to go. So stronger limitations upon these repurposings of funds is a really important step that we should be looking for. And to take us kind of into current events, the third and also another important thing here is to oppose Congress's military budget for this year. The 2026 NDAA, which stands for National Defense Authorization Act. It's an annual law passed by Congress to provide the military with funds that it needs. You know, the funds that it says it needs. I guess I should correct myself. So in this year's NDAA, which is currently being debated in both the Senate and the House, it would create a $1 trillion military budget for the first time in American history when combined with the additional military funding. A historic, perhaps historic in the entire scale of humanity, waste of funding, not towards the survival of humanity, but rather towards the persecution of humanity. It's important to look at the details of these kinds of bills, though, because they can tell you about what's going to happen in the future a little bit. Looking for National Guard provisions in this bill, in this new upcoming military budget, there's a lot more funding that's going to National Guard deployments for Border Patrol and for anti-narcotics, for anti-drug operations around the United States. These, to me, kind of set off immediate alarms as pools of money that can be dipped into to send the National Guard into Memphis or into Chicago or into New Orleans or into any other city. So looking at these kinds of budget lines can kind of help give us an idea of what the resources they might have for future occupations would be. Right now, because the bill's still being debated, there's a lot that's going to get put in and taken out. But right now, there's only one additional restriction that is put at all on the domestic deployment of the National Guard in this budget bill, which is requiring them to identify themselves as National Guard. That seems like something that should be so obvious that it would have been law a long time ago. But considering how many times we've been seeing masked federal officers and officers with no insignia whatsoever hopping out of cars and kidnapping people off of the street, it might be nice to at least have them tell us that it's the government kidnapping people and not anyone else. There's a bill being proposed, among other amendments, that is kind of a step in the right direction, but very much a baby step in the right direction. A senator and a congressman from California are proposing an amendment to this bill that would increase reporting requirements and basically require the Trump administration to give information about all of its deployments ahead of time in detail. This won't actually change much on the ground. It's just a way of collecting information, but it is one more barrier kind of thrown in the way of these deployments. And it's pointing in the direction of policies that we should be advocating for. But given how minor all of these restrictions are on the National Guard's activities compared to the severity of their infringement upon our liberties, I think that we should just be asking straight up for our members of Congress to not vote for this legislation at all. Any amount of money going to the military or the National Guard right now should be read as a direct attack on the freedoms and the justice that we are fighting for every day in the United States. And the good news is that AFSC has ways for you to communicate this quite simply to your member of Congress. If we could get to my next and final slide. AFSC.org/take-action makes this easy with a lot of action alerts that have pre-written text for you to go in and provide your address and send letters to members of Congress on the issues that matter to you most, including this one from earlier this year, telling Congress to support human needs and not these endless wars and the militarism that accompanies them. You could find a lot of different specified action alerts like this related to issues that matter for you the most. But related to this, I think now is a very good time to be contacting your members of Congress and asking them to say that enough is enough, that we do not need the military occupying our streets, repressing people's liberties, repressing people of color and communities of color, wasting our money on the destruction and the degradation of human life rather than the promotion of it. So afsc.org/take-action is a resource for you to contact your members of Congress about these and other issues. And I just hope that that was useful. And also, Sarah in the chat points out another piece of legislation that's worth promoting, the No Secret Police Act, which is another federal reform along these lines. But those are just sort of the things that I've been thinking about in terms of trying to figure out where all this goes from here and what form it might take.
Brett, friend, thank you so much for looking out for us, for again making what's happening federally make sense for all of us. So appreciated. And also just, yeah, I feel like there's a couple of phrases I want to grab from what you shared today, especially this notion of promoting the degradation of humanity rather than promoting, people's actual humanity and helping people. So thank you. This is huge and super powerful. And I want to see if there are any sort of immediate questions for Brett after that rich sharing. Please, King, go right ahead.
Thanks, Brett. It was just a small comment that you made that triggered a small comment that I had made. And that was in 1967 in both Detroit and Newark in response to those rebellions. Guards people were put out on the streets with 6 hours of training. And when I hear you report that one of the National Guard directors is saying that the money is coming out of the training budget, I'm thinking now on the street that in our day-to-day interactions with these guards people, they may be completely untrained and placed in a strange situation, and that could lead to additional consequences. So thanks for pointing that out. That 67 till now is not that far away, it appears.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, and it kind of shows what the long-term effects with this would be if we're not training the National Guard and then also sending these not trained National Guard out to police our streets. It is just a nightmare waiting to happen, particularly because the National Guard did not initially come armed when they came to DC. They were deployed unarmed in a lot of the positions that they are, and they're now walking around with M4 carbines, with heavy military weaponry, and not just the kind that DC police likes to carry around. So it is a recipe for bad things to come.
Can I pop in just with one commercial announcement? Just wanted to remind people, I did pop it in earlier, but we are supporting About Face Veterans Against the War, the Right to Refuse campaign, because National Guards people and active duty military people can refuse to illegal orders. And so, but they need our support. So that's a campaign to take a look at.
Thank you, Mary. Seeing a lot of appreciation in the chat for Brett's sharing and all the resources. Just a reminder, folks, we always send follow-up emails after these calls. So everything that we are offering in terms of taking action, we'll send you as a follow-up. And Rosemary, I see your hand. Please speak up.
Unmute. Will not allow participants. Okay, I'm actually, you just answered my question, because I know that just from hearing this, I won't have it with enough clarity to share it with my meeting, which I definitely want to do particularly in regard to the defense bill, and to share it with our FCNL action group here in New Mexico. So yeah, I'm glad it will come in written form.
Yes. Yeah, we'll send the slides. We'll send all of the links and all of the resources we've talked about and shared in the chat today.
Okay, thank you. That's what I needed to know.
Absolutely.
Now let me get this down.
Thank you, Rosemary. And friends, yeah, any other questions or comments people want to make?
See Karen's question about police ability to disobey unlawful orders, and I have a lawyer present here. King is here, but my take on it, King, is that if you're asked to do something illegal, you can refuse to do it, but also I don't know how much support there is in those instances, and I know each different municipality is going to have like a different police accountability sort of body. So I think it gets kind of complicated. I don't know, King, if there's anything you would add or correct about that.
No, it is very complicated, but I would say generally they do have a right to disobey unlawful orders. Someone to order one of them to shoot somebody, they would not be required to do it, although sorting all of that out afterwards would be quite a mess.
Got it. Okay, I'm seeing a question in the chat, but I'm also seeing Charlie's hand raised. Charlie, if you want to go ahead and ask your question, Summer can unmute you. And then Paula, looks like Brett's responding, but we can get to your question eventually.
So my question is this, not in terms of sort of figuring out the risks that we're willing to take, but more about the legal and practical question. What would your advice be for nonviolently resisting arrest during an ICE or some other kind of raid?
Charlie, and that question, are you asking that question from the perspective of a US citizen, like a white US citizen, or are you asking that from the perspective of an immigrant of color?
Well, I actually was trying to include both of those perspectives because,
Got it.
I am very, very aware that if you're in certain categories, certain activities are dangerous. I had a friend, for example, who's a Native American, who found a $100 bill that he wasn't sure if it was legal or not. Might have been counterfeit. And somebody on the chat with him suggested, get a white person to take it to the bank because we know what happens. And so, like, I'm not suggesting that people take crazy risks. But if a person has the privilege to take some risks, what would you advise?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, Charlie. Yeah, and sort of answering that around people with privileged citizenship and status. So there's a lot of know your rights work that's happening. A lot of our programs are leading a lot of that work. So many immigrant rights organizations throughout the country are. Here, I'll speak from Colorado's perspective. Here in Colorado, we do trainings through a rapid response network that teaches people how to be folks who go out, first of all, when there's a threat of ICE presence or someone has seen them, to act first, to go out to confirm, is this an actual true thing? Or is ICE here? A lot of this is run by volunteers and a lot of allies to the immigrant community here. And so, first there's like sort of a role to play in making sure that's happening. Then we have, different kinds of roles for people to play, to both figure out who the agents are, to get names, to distract. So there's a lot of strategies that you can do sort of within the confines of the law that keep ICE agents from doing their jobs. And what they're there to do. And I'll just offer that and then open it up to see if my other colleagues and other folks on the call have some responses as well. People are getting creative, so I'll just say that, right? Doing all kinds of things. You see stuff online of the ways in which people are slowing down and getting in the way, taking video, documenting all of that.
Yeah, I was just going to add that I love the image of be the sand in the gear, slow it down, because one thing you do have to remember though is that you can, the guy who threw a sandwich got federal charges. Like, anything you are risking federal charges if you're So that's just a good thing to keep in mind and make your decision. But I think there are lots of really great nonviolent tactics that are being used, like making noise outside the hotel where the ICE folks are staying, things like that, just as Edith was saying, getting creative. And I just want to mention, I have seen, oh, and somebody already did it, gave some resource for what you can say in Spanish if you see an ICE raid. That's awesome. Look at, everybody's got so much knowledge here, Edith. It's incredible.
Yeah, it is beautiful. And yeah, to the person who has a question about what to say in Spanish, read the red cards, right? And then figure out how to, I think as a witness, figure out how to get information from a person who might be being detained. Also, there's just one question about young people and this call, and I'll just say, as an organization, a lot of our base and a lot of the people that are part of AFSC are older people, and that's sort of like, we work with a breadth of folks. We don't just say we only work with older people, but that seems to be who is primarily our constituency. And so I'll just say, like, there are other organizations that are doing incredible work. We also have youth programs within AFSC, right? We have our emerging leaders folks. We have 67 Sueños. We have Roots for Peace. We have all kinds. Sorry if I'm just naming Western programs because I'm not remembering everybody else. But please know, we go with sort of what our role is. And so we won't start a brand new program to engage masses of young people, but there are orgs that are doing that. Angelica, please join us, and then I'll transition us after this question.
I just wanted to kind of respond to Charlie's question. I work with an immigrants' rights organization here in Kansas City. And one of the things that we have found incredibly helpful is when our rapid response folks go out to ICE sightings, that taking video is one of the most powerful tools, because we had, for example, raids on 2 Mexican restaurants here in the area, and our folks were able to intimidate the ICE agents by asking questions, by saying, "Do you have a warrant?" And they were nice and friendly about it, but they got so flustered they actually ended up letting our folks go into the restaurant and filming what had happened there. And then we put it on local media. So any kind of video footage that the media had from those raids came from our people. So the one thing that we were trained in doing, do not touch the agents, but you can ask questions, and you can ask hard questions. And I do have to say as well that a lot of our rapid response folks are actually allies. There are some from our immigrant community that might go out as well if they're citizens, but we try to protect them and not put them into danger. So anyway, that's just my comment.
Thank you so much, Angelica. I appreciate that. It's really wonderful to hear the way folks are showing up in their communities for themselves, for their neighborhoods. Yeah, just a lot of gratitude for all the wisdom that people are sharing here. And just as a reminder, yeah, connect with your local immigrant rights organization, and figure out what's going on. You probably have a rapid response network where you are. Find out what the work is, and get connected however you can. Saida, please go ahead, and then I'll move us along.
Okay. Angelica, I'm so glad you shared that, and those in the chat too. And just wanted to let people know that next month, October's 3rd Tuesday, is all about immigration, all about how people are protecting, resisting, and building. You'll be hearing from immigrant rights lawyers, immigrant rights advocates, people out disrupting ICE, people like just incredible experience. So I hope that you'll come back next month on the 3rd Tuesday, which I believe is October 22nd, because it'll be I'm so excited to learn from my coworkers how they're doing it successfully.
Thank you, Saida. I didn't know that, so that's excellent. I appreciate you sharing that. Friends, okay, I think we're getting close to our end. As you can see in the chat, Mary is sharing articles, actions to take. So just track Mary Zirkle's comments. There's actually a really cool article that came out about this framework that we're operating in on our third Tuesday calls called Protect, Resist, and Build. And we are, as an organization, I think there's one last slide we want to show, Summer, if that's okay. We've been doing sessions, I think, for a good almost a year now. Is that right, Mary?
I think
I
this
don't
is
remember.
our 9th month.
9th month. Okay, great.
Yeah.
So friends, we are an organization that's always trying to raise resources to continue to do this good work. And so if you feel so moved, if you have the sort of capacity, ability, we'd ask you to become a partner for peace with AFSC. This is actually the first time we've even mentioned fundraising on one of our calls. And that's because for us, that's never really been the driving force. We wanted to gather with people and build community with all of you. At some point, we had 150 people on this phone call every month. That seems to be about the number that shows up. And so we feel like there's a beautiful momentum here. We want to keep it going. And yeah, if you feel inspired, again, have the ability to, we'd love for you to support the good work that folks like King, folks like Imani, Saida, Brett are doing, Zoe, who's on this call, Mary, who are doing all the time in these really important places where power is being abused, and we have to sort of stand up and fight back. So thank you so much for being here, friends. As a reminder, we'll send everything out to you digitally after this phone call. And please go celebrate the boycott of, the UFW boycott, great boycott. Please go celebrate Mexican Independence Day. And we will send us out with a beautiful song that is probably very familiar to you. And yes, please don't forget the Friday Palestine Action Hour. It's listed above in our chat. So thank you very much again for being here, for coming back. We will see you next month.